Well, let's take a closer look at what the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework is all about. The agreement includes the historic 30 by 30 goal, which looks to achieve the effective conservation, management, and restoration of at least 30% of the world's land and waters by the year 2030. The deal directs countries to allocate $200 billion every year for biodiversity initiatives from both public and private sectors. Developed countries will take more responsibility in funding biodiversity conservation. The agreement also contains more quantifiable targets on cutting global food waste, reducing harmful subsidies, and preventing the introduction of invasive alien species. Well, for more on this, we are joined by Professor Chuks Okereke, Professor of Global Environmental and Climate Governance. He joins us from Oxford, UK. Professor, welcome to the program. Welcome. It's been hailed as a landmark deal at safeguarding biodiversity. How significant is it?
Well, in theory, it is very significant. The question will, of course, be the extent to which the countries will be able to implement. As you have said in your introduction, there are three key aspects of the deal. One is to safeguard 30% of the biological diversity by 2030. The second is the commitment to have 30% restoration of degraded ecosystem. And then the third is, of course, the extra financial commitment that have been made to help to ensure the conservation of biological diversity. And I also like the fact that in addition to the targets, they have made an attempt to, to have a framework of monitoring and evaluation that will help to see that countries actually implement the commitments. But again, from what we have seen in the past decade and with the climate change, it is not always guaranteed that these targets will be met. So the real question now is the extent to which countries will be able to implement these ambitious targets.
All right, Professor, the most significant part of the deal is commitment to protect 30%. 30% of land and water considered important for biodiversity. The question is, how important is this to Africa?
Well, Africa is not removed from the rest of the world. Just like in other parts of the world, Africa has been seeing extraordinary loss of biological diversity. The number of insects are plummeting. The percentage of African forests have been decreasing at an alarming proportion. Africa's oceans have also been really inundated with plastics. The use of fertilizers have been affecting the soil quality in Africa. So the promise or the target to restore 30% of degraded ecosystem and preserve 30% of African ecosystem is a welcome development. Africa, by the way, prides itself as one of the green continents. Many of African countries have huge, extensive, forests, like DR Congo, like Nigeria, like Cameroon. So this is a very significant deal for Africa. However, some African countries, as I'm sure you may have known, are not quite happy that the deal was forced through at the last minute of Monday early morning, without attending to the significant concern that they have about the funding arrangement. And so while the target is very significant for Africa, the key question is how Africa will receive the funding that is required in order to be able to implement the deal.
Important points that you have made there, Professor. Let's talk more about that. Financing has been among the most contentious issues, with delegates from 70 developing countries walking out of negotiations. How can the issue of funding be resolved?
Yes, one of the best ways to resolve the issue of funding is by rebuilding trust. Now, a lot of the time, rich countries have made promises which they have not kept. And these have really led to the erosion of trust in the global diplomatic institutions. We see this in climate change, but also we see it in biological diversity. The first thing to do is for the rich countries to be upfront about apologizing for not being able to meet their past commitments and to make strident efforts to meet their commitments. If they want, and I think they have the right to insist that the funding that they provide should be spent in a particular type of way that guarantees transparency and accountability. I'm all for making sure that that happens. Some kind of monitoring and evaluation framework can be put in place to ensure that African countries that receive money spend it in a judicious way and for the purposes for which those funds have been met. But when you make promises regularly and you don't keep those promises, you are bound to suffer from a mistrust issue. And that is one of the problems that we have had in the Biological Diversity Convention, as well as in the Climate Change Convention.
Okay, Professor Chuks Okereke, I'd like to thank you so much for your insights and thank you so much for sharing your perspective. Much appreciated.